With over 8 million produced, the Panzerfaust became one of the most iconic and devastating anti-tank weapons of World War II. But by the time it was handed out to anyone from 16 to 60, especially in the decimated cities of Germany, its use had turned into something darker than the war itself. You've seen it in movies, but now you'll hear its full story. Let's start from the very beginning. The name Panzerfaust, which literally translates to armor fist in German, was a perfect reflection of German ingenuity in weapon naming. Its creation came about after a brutal realization on the Eastern Front in 1942. Following the invasion of the Soviet Union and the destruction of earlier light tanks like the BT series, the Germans faced a serious problem when the Soviet T-34 and KV-1 tanks appeared. These were far superior in both armament and armor compared to most German tanks at the time, rendering the existing German anti-tank weapons ineffective. Initially, the primary German anti-tank weapon was the 37mm Taud anti-tank gun, nicknamed Dorner, the Doorbell, which had limited effectiveness. Even when mounted on the Panzerfaust, the Germans knew that armor advancements would soon make the 37mm obsolete, so they were already working on a replacement with the 15mm and later the 7mm anti-tank guns. However, the issue was how to quickly implement these new designs on the battlefield, especially when fighting against faster, better armored tanks. In addition to anti-tank guns, the Germans used anti-tank rifles, but by now, these had become ineffective against newer, heavier tanks. Other methods included mines and magnetic charges, which required a soldier to physically attach them to a tank, dangerous and impractical. The Germans needed something cheap, portable, mass-producible, and capable of providing infantry with an anti-tank option that didn't rely on close-range combat. This led to the development of the Panzerfaust. The concept behind the Panzerfaust was a recoilless launch tube that fired a shaped charge warhead. It was designed to be a simple, disposable, one-shot weapon that could be carried by infantrymen into tight spaces where larger anti-tank guns couldn't go. Early testing was plagued with issues, particularly with backblast and armor penetration, but by 1943, these problems were solved, and the first model, the Panzerfaust 30, was produced. At its core, the Panzerfaust was a single-shot recoilless launcher with a preloaded warhead. The steel tube, packed with black powder propellant, would launch the warhead when the soldier squeezed the trigger. The blast would push out of the rear of the tube, neutralizing recoil, but creating a deadly backblast. Anyone standing within about 10 meters behind the soldier would be in serious danger from the blast. This meant firing the weapon in tight, enclosed spaces was dangerous. Soldiers risked getting burned or concussed. The warhead itself was a shaped charge, designed to focus explosive energy into a hot jet capable of penetrating between 140 to 2,000 nm of armor, depending on the model. For 1943, this was a staggering capability, enough to punch through most Allied tanks, especially if aimed at the rear or side. The main drawback, however, was the extremely short range, just around 30 meters if you wanted a decent chance of hitting the target. The weapon's sights were calibrated for fixed distances like 30, 60, and 80 meters. But trying to hit a moving tank under fire from such a close range was a daunting task. Despite its short range, the Panzerfaust was lightweight, thus weighing just 5 to 7 kg, making it easy for a single soldier to carry and use effectively in close-quarter combat. And when it was used in combat, it immediately proved effective. The first batches reached German infantry on the Eastern Front by September 1943, just as Soviet tank brigades were ramping up their offensives. German soldiers, now equipped with the Panzerfaust, were able to knock out T-34s and other Soviet tanks with surprising efficiency. The weapon was particularly effective in trench warfare and urban combat, where German soldiers set up Panzer commandos, tank hunter teams. These teams would lie in wait ambushing Soviet tanks from the side or rear, often using the element of surprise to maximize the Panzerfaust's effectiveness. A single cheap, disposable weapon could destroy a tank that cost a fortune to produce, train a crew for, and send to the front. The tactic was simple, but deadly. In fact, by the end of the war, around 70% of Soviet tank losses were caused not by heavy German tanks, like the Tiger or Panther, nor by the fearsome 8A anti-tank guns, but by the cheap and disposable Panzerfaust. As the war shifted to urban environments, with tanks operating in narrow streets and rubble, the Panzerfaust was devastating. Tanks were vulnerable to ambushes in these environments, and the Panzerfaust was perfectly suited for this kind of warfare. The Allies, particularly the Americans and British, soon adopted similar defensive measures, using cage armor to protect their tanks. This involved attaching makeshift armor, like logs, sandbags, and even wire mesh, to detonate the warhead before it could hit the main tank armor. Despite these efforts, the Panzerfaust remained a formidable threat, particularly in the close quarter combat of urban settings. The Panzerfaust went through several iterations, each improving on the range and lethality of its predecessors. The Panzerfaust 30 was followed by the Panzerfaust 60 in 1944, which doubled the effective range. The Panzerfaust 100, introduced later, could penetrate up to 220 mm of armor, making it effective against even the heaviest Allied tanks. The Panzerfaust 150 had a sleeker, more precise design, with a range of 150 meters, and could even act as an anti-infantry weapon when fitted with a fragmentation sleeve. By 1945, the Panzerfaust 250 was being designed to be a reloadable launcher, resembling the modern RPGs we see today. But the war ended before it could be mass-produced. After the war, Soviet designers took notice of the Panzerfaust, and just a few years later, in 1949, they introduced the RPG-2, which bore a striking resemblance to the German design. As the war reached its final stages, the Panzerfaust was issued to civilians and the Volkssturm, people's militia. Anyone who could hold a weapon, from young boys to elderly men. Desperation drove them to take up arms against the advancing Allies, and while many of them met tragic fates, some did succeed in destroying Allied tanks in the final days of the war. The Panzerfaust stands as a testament to German ingenuity and desperation, offering infantry a last-ditch weapon against the overwhelming power of enemy armor. While it may have been cheap, effective, and deadly, it also became a symbol of the sheer brutality and despair that marked the closing days of the war.